Hello, hello, hello. We are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our IOCDF Diversity Roundtable. My name is Dr. Darlene Davis Goodwine, and tonight I am bringing to you a panel that we hope to really engage our community, our OCD community, in the space of diversity, specifically speaking to the overlapping experiences that those of us in this community have come to know and understand to be kind of like the norm. So before we get into our panel and greet our wonderful panelists, of course, have to give all the disclaimers. So wherever you're joining me from, please feel free to use the chat box, the chat space. We'd like to engage with our listeners, our viewers. This is a safe space for questions, a safe space for concerns. Sometimes we're able to get to them, sometimes we're not. If there's something intentional that you want to share or bring forward, please feel free to do so. This is a safe space. So I'll get into my little excerpt and then we'll start the process. So I first would like to, again, welcome everyone. While we are waiting and giving people more time to join us, keep in mind that this is a live link. And so wherever you're watching from tonight, just know that there are specific things about this space that I will speak to here. This is a live stream and it is intended to serve as an educational space. This is educational content and it is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or you are feeling suicidal or feel unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the suicide prevention hotline at 1-800-273-8255. We have additional resources where you can also contact the suicide and crisis hotline at 988. We want to make sure that this space feels safe. And so in order to do that, we have some agreements that we'd like to introduce to this space. As we know, when you talk about content around diversity and differences, it can get heavy, it can get really uncomfortable. And so what we want to position in this space is this idea that we can still show up and exist in this space, feel uncomfortable, and stay. And recreate a space and a connection where we experience kindness, we experience respect. And with that, keep in mind that this is being broadcast on various social media platforms and is being recorded. So please be mindful of that as you ask personal questions, share personal experiences, and leave comments. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. And so with that, we want to get started because again, as many of you know, we tend to have an hour, but we tend to use it up also pretty quickly. So let's get started. I am your moderator, Dr. DG, Darlene Davis Goodwine. And the agreements that I like to introduce to the space is that we hold a space where differing perspectives are respected. We model effective ways to have difficult dialogue around topics of diversity, and we take action steps towards enacting change. Okay? So with our solid foundation and this mission to foster a hopeful, supportive environment and our agreements that center respect and modeling effective communication, I think it's time for us to shift our attention over to our wonderful panelists. And when we do our introductions, we leave it open to the panelists because again, as I explained to them, this is a safe space, it's very conversational. And what we hope to do is to center these experiences, again, where OCD and the overlapping experiences of OCD, namely in the area of diagnosis. But as I said before, because this isn't a clinical space, this is more community space, we wanted to use the terminology that best reflects what we hope to capture today and what we hope to connect with our community on today. So panelists, I want to first say thank you again for being here this evening, for giving up your evening and positioning yourself to be vulnerable and share your lived experiences and also be willing to connect with this community. So I would love to turn it over to you all. You can tag each other in. If you don't mind, share your name, your role on the panel, any of the identities that you feel comfortable sharing, maybe how long you've been like navigating the space in which you care to share about, and then any interesting or relevant information that information that might give the viewers a sense of who you are and what's important to you. So who would like to go first? Tag.
I can go first.
Maya, you're it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya. I am a senior undergraduate student. I'm originally from Long Island, New York, but right now I am in North Carolina. And I have OCD. Obviously, that's why I'm here. I've had OCD since I was 14. I was very lucky and fortunate to be diagnosed only a few months after my OCD started. And my overlapping experience that I'm going to mainly be talking about today is ADHD, which I was diagnosed with about a year ago, but that's a lifelong thing. So I've had that my whole life, but I've just only been learning how to deal with it pretty much through therapy for the past year. And I have some other overlapping experiences that will probably pop up, like depression and anxiety and skin picking and things like that. I'm trying to think of any other relevant information. I think that's it. I will pass it over to the next panelist who wants to go.
Well, before you go, anything interesting? Kyra, I see you tagged in. You can stay in, but just
I'm
anything
sorry, I was
interesting.
yeah.
Maya, anything interesting, fun?
That's a good question. Okay. I have 2 dogs. I don't know if you can see them. I have like little stuffed animal versions of them on my bed right there.
That's cute.
Yeah.
That's too cute. All right. Thank you, Maya. Welcome again. Looking forward to hearing what you have to share. All right, Kyra, you're at tag.
All right, I guess I'll go. So, hi, I'm Kyra, but however you say my name, totally fine. I'm going to call it Kyra, Kiara. I'll answer to anything at this point. I take no offense whatsoever. I am a high school senior, and I have been dealing with OCD for most of my life. And over the course of my life, it has shifted and morphed into different subtypes. So, for example, I used to be a competitive gymnast, and back then I used to have ritualistic OCD, which basically meant that I had to do really specific actions before I did certain skills, or I was convinced I was going to crash and hurt myself. But then once I stopped gymnastics, it mainly kind of morphed into contamination-based and perfectionism. And the overlapping experience I'm going to be talking about today is body dysmorphic disorder. I also run an organization that tries to help people that are affected with OCD called Common Ground. And I felt that I had a really unique experience with OCD because, you know, I'm a teen, I'm still living with my parents and trying to navigate all of those different relationships and the struggles that come with it and school and everything like that. So I just want anyone to know that if you're out there and you're dealing with those same things, don't feel alone, because me too. I was doing the same thing as you. And I guess something interesting about me, I also have a dog. He is in my mom's bedroom right now, just in case, God forbid, somebody walks in front of the window and he goes crazy. But yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing, Kyra. Now, Kyra, you know how I feel about names. And so I will correct myself. Her and I had a very specific conversation about names. So I am intentional, will hold myself accountable to Kyra. I will not allow you to accept anything
totally
today.
fine.
That's my issue, not yours, but I thank you. All right, thank you for joining us, Kyra. All right, Alexandra, I think you're up.
Hi, my name is Alex, and I am an IOCDF advocate. I am also a stay-at-home mom to a 4-year-old son who you may hear in the background. He is amazing. I am a hopeful grad student, hopefully a grad student sometime soon in the future. Yes, and I would like to become an OCD therapist one day. I'm just going to put that out there in public so that everybody holds me accountable. I am going to be speaking today about OCD and trauma. I have diagnoses of CPTSD as well as chronic dissociation. So I'll be talking about that. It's kind of a heavy topic, but hopefully we can bring some lightness to it and maybe inspire some hope, as that is always my goal in my advocacy and in my personal life, is to bring humor to the darkness and inspire hope. Something fun about me is, okay, I love video games, and I love to play video games with my 4-year-old, and he is actually a lot better at me at a lot of them. I also have a super, super, super diehard love for Bad Bunny. I love reggaeton. I know I shouldn't, but I do.
And because this is a no judgment zone, we will not bring any of that negativity your way about any of the things you shared that you might feel a little uncomfortable with, especially the 4-year-old beating you in video games. I think that's worth noting. No kidding. Yeah, so a couple of you, well, I think actually all of you I've spoken with specifically, because I remember you were on a panel earlier. Alexandra, Alex, where are you? One of the things that brought this particular topic to the forefront is that we do a lot of advocacy work around OCD, and we're constantly trying to bring it forward and remove the stigma around it and the misunderstanding around it. There's a lot of just misinformation out there. And so while you all have already explained kind of the overlapping experiences or the diagnosis specifically, I'm curious as to what you would share about the experience of it. Like, what did you notice came first, right? Like, we have this chicken or egg dynamic that I always think about as a clinician. Like, which one came first? And we know that, and if you don't know, I'll be the first to tell you, OCD rarely shows up solo. Like, it's very rare. So I think when we were talking about this and trying to be clear about the advocacy and the mission and aligning with that and bringing people to the table to have conversations about that, I think that was what we were really hoping to pull this panel together to speak to. So yeah, do you mind starting that process for us? Just talking about, like, you know, how you came to understand and figure out like this overlapping experience.
I guess I can go first. So as I said, I've had OCD for most of my life, but it only got really severe in 2018. I'd say before that, it was just like, looking back on it, you could tell that some of the things I did were OCD tendencies, but they weren't enough to like go and get a diagnosis or anything like that. So my OCD came first before any of my overlapping experiences. And so then when I noticed I started having some body dysmorphic disorder tendencies, I was like, wait a minute, is this OCD? It doesn't feel quite the same, but I've never dealt with anything else. And like I said, OCD likes to shift and morph. And so I'm like, is this a new subtype I'm developing? What's going on? And so then I was just very confused throughout the whole process because I didn't know too much about body dysmorphic disorder. And at that time, I didn't know a lot about OCD either, but I did know about ERP. So I was trying to do some exposures for my body dysmorphic disorder, which is what I kind of thought was a different subtype of OCD at the time, and nothing was working, and I was just really confused, and I felt really isolated because not only was I going through really troubling OCD at the time, but I also had something else that I couldn't figure out, and I was very confused, and I was still, I think at this time, when body dysmorphic disorder started coming around, I was maybe 15, which it happens to like a lot of young girls, which is really difficult, and especially on social media, comparing yourself. And it didn't start off like crazy. It just started with little degrading comments to myself and comparing myself and wishing that I could be somebody else. And then it just spiraled, as it does. So I'll pass the mic over to whoever wants it next, but I just wanted to put that out there. It was a very confusing and troubling time for me.
I'll go. So as far, I know that this is a hotly debated issue too in the community as far as whether, you know, OCD or trauma come first and what, you know, what causes what. So I will say that my experience is that both probably developed around the same time. I have had OCD as long as I can remember, and so I know my experience isn't the same as everybody's. Some people feel like it really starts later in life, but when I look back, I can remember symptoms that I now know clearly are OCD as, far back as 4, 5, 6. And since my trauma is childhood trauma, it probably started when I was born, but I'm not sure. So as far back as I can remember, there's also that. So I think they've always just kind of been hitched to each other in a wonderful marriage.
I can go next. So it's kind of interesting because OCD is something that can have an onset. Like a lot of people can say like, oh, I noticed symptoms starting at this age. It can be something that you might have never experienced before and then you have, or you had very subclinical symptoms and then you have the clinical onset of OCD. And for me, my clinical onset was when I was 14, like I said. But I had like some subclinical things, some generalized anxiety things before that. But ADHD is something that doesn't really have an onset. It's something that you kind of have for your whole life. But I just didn't know that I had it. So I guess the ADHD came first. Looking back into my childhood, I can see symptoms of it. But it wasn't diagnosed till I was 20. So weirdly, the OCD was diagnosed first, but the ADHD came first, if that makes sense. And it was very weird for me because my ADHD was only diagnosed because my OCD got so much better, and these few symptoms kept coming back that were originally attributed to OCD, like difficulty focusing. I was always told, oh, you're having difficulty focusing because of intrusive thoughts. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what it is. But then when I stopped having a lot of intrusive thoughts, I was like, why am I still having difficulty focusing? Why am I still restless if I'm not anxious? Why am I still like these things that were chalked up to anxiety and OCD when I was not anxious anymore just kept continuing. And I was like, what is this? And my therapist suggested that it could be ADHD. And I was like, no way, I don't have that. But then I got evaluated and it turns out I did have that, or do have that. And looking back, it now makes a lot of sense and explains a lot of my childhood and early adulthood.
So one of the things I'll say to you as the panelist, keep in mind, you don't have to tag in and wait kind of thing. Because I imagine as you're hearing each other speak, like it's triggering thoughts of like, oh yeah, I had that too. So keep in mind, that is the fullness of the roundtable, to have the audience here kind of like, oh yeah, that happened to me, or I thought about that. Keep in mind that that's a space. And so before I send it back around to you all, and you just keep bouncing it around, because it's not a linear thing. You don't gotta like stand in line and wait your turn. I will say that what's interesting from my seat is that one of the things I heard, at least for those of you who kind of like saw one before the other, like it's clear to you, whereas Alex was like, no, this definitely has been like, they've been hanging out together for a while. You two, Kyra and Maya, were like, no, I noticed it and it got really weird for me. Like it got really confusing. And I think that's important to speak to, especially for folks in treatment who are already feeling like you're failing or you're not doing it right. Like that can be really hard. So I'm curious as to, as you found yourself navigating and beginning the process of understanding how they exist together, like what was that like before you realized like the other diagnoses existed, or even in Alex's case, where as you started to get treatment around them, because we know, to your point, Alex, the debate is like, you treat one or the other. Like we're not, especially with OCD and PTSD, like that trauma stuff, they're like, no, you gotta deal with that. And we saw that. Sometimes you still see it a lot in substance abuse, like, no, treat the substance abuse first and then you get the other things. If we bring it back to this space, I'm curious, what was your experience, Alex? So Kyra and Maya, it's more like, what was that like for you once you realized, like in the beginning, in the midst of all that weirdness and confusion? To speak to that, because I think that's important for folks to have that validation.
In the beginning for me, I mentioned that I was around like 14, 15 when my OCD really started to get worse. And it was kind of what Maya was talking about. It was, I had something that kind of sparked, like a traumatic experience, I guess, that kind of sparked the spiral of OCD. I used to be a competitive gymnast, and I trained 34 hours a week, and it was my whole life for many, many years. And then I got injured, and I lost the sport, and I lost my identity, and I didn't really know who I was at that point. And I was also going through a lot of medical procedures. I've had 3 hip surgeries, and I guess I developed, I don't know, my OCD as a way to kind of cope with my whole life changing. It was something that I could control. And but when it first started, believe me, I was not very self-aware. I didn't realize that, and I didn't even think I had a problem. My mom was like, oh, like, I'm noticing these things. We should kind of go and get you some therapy so it can help. And I was like, me? I'm fine. Like, it's not a problem. Like, I'll do it myself. Like, I'll just stop doing the little bad habits. And I convinced her, and then it started getting even worse. And so looking back on it now, definitely should have listened to my mother and gotten control of it when the symptoms first started getting worse, because it was so much harder after like a year had gone by, and I was really
plug for the parents, right? Like plug for the
Right.
parents, all the parents.
Right. As much as I hate to admit it, no, I'm just kidding, but yeah, it grew exponentially in such a short amount of time, and I had no clue it was going to do that, despite, I don't know, being warned that it was going to do that. I was like, no, it's okay, I can do ERP myself, but I was just kind of going through the motions, and I wasn't really doing anything at all. And I'm like, this ERP stuff is absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't even work. Like, I don't know why people swear by it. And I was just like the petulant teenager resistant to anything that, I don't know, I guess was trying to help me. But then I had another experience, which I guess we'll probably talk about later in the stream, which basically like shifted my mindset regarding ERP and getting better. So sorry.
Sure now. Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
sorry. I didn't know if there was like a specific time or place. So my OCD really peaked in the summer of 2021, and I was basically confined to my room. It had taken control over my whole life, and it was miserable. I just remember going to sleep every night, like wishing that I wouldn't wake up in the morning because it was so like gut-wrenching, and it was also really shameful because it was my fault that I had let it get this bad, you know. And so that spring, before my OCD got really bad, my mom had the great idea of getting an exchange student or hosting an exchange student that coming fall, because I go to high school online, so that was originally because of my crazy gymnastics schedule, but it also really helped post gymnastics with all the surgeries and everything like that, but I didn't have too many friends. So anyways, we hosted an exchange student from France, and she was right around my age, and she was so excited to go out and see new things and learn all about the US and have all these new experiences. And at that time, OCD kind of convinced me that no, like, I'm an introvert, I like to stay at home, I don't like to do any of those fun things. But seeing how happy it made her and going and accompanying her on these experiences was really eye-opening to me. And I was like, you know what? I would do anything to be able to live this carefree and to be happy again, I guess, like how I once was. So that's what really changed my mindset about ERP. Because before I was just kind of going through the motions, not really putting my soul into it. But once I realized that it was what I had to do to get better, and I really started putting everything into it, then I noticed the results. And I'm like, oh, I guess they weren't lying when they said that ERP
Right.
works. And I'm like, if only I had known. But it did really take that crazy experiments to kind of change my mindset about the whole thing. And then my progress, I guess, motivated me to keep doing it. So that's just kind of my story in a nutshell. And I'll let someone else speak, but yeah.
I love that. That resonates so much for me. The whole agoraphobia part. I have a lot of contamination stuff, and so I've gone through bouts of agoraphobia my whole life. And I honestly think that to some degree, I didn't realize that I wasn't a true introvert who just wanted to stay at home watching anime, because that's what I used to do, and playing video games. And it wasn't until I started ERP and kind of started seeing a little bit of results that I was like, oh my gosh, I can go do fun things and have friends and meet them for coffee. And, you know, it doesn't have to be this way. And I think that for me, at least, I think there's always kind of that tendency once I start lapsing to feel like the agoraphobia is creeping back in. And that's when I have to go back to my ERP skills, which is frustrating. But I think as far as your question, Darlene, I think that with the trauma and OCD, I didn't realize I had trauma. And this is going to sound silly. Like I didn't realize I had trauma. I didn't realize I had complex trauma. Part of my dissociative disorder is that I don't remember a lot. I have large gaps in my memory from childhood. And so I knew that things were bad. I didn't know the extent. And so I just didn't think it affected me. And so I went into therapy and I knew that something was wrong. And I knew something felt like horrendously wrong. Like it felt like I had a, not just OCD, because that felt like it explained some of it, but not like this hole or this darkness that I always felt like I had inside. And, how I felt compelled to numb out using substances and, just however I could really to just not feel that kind of like that emptiness. And I was like, that's not OCD, but I don't have another explanation for it. And so I did ERP and I did really well. And I kind of graduated my ERP program. And then I just went right back to how I was. And I would go back to my therapist and he was like, I just don't understand what's going on, why you're not getting better. You're not. And so he decided to try and treat my trauma. And we did prolonged exposure, and prolonged exposure was not good for me. I dissociated like that. And so he sent me to a trauma specialist. And I was like, I don't need this. Why are you sending me to a trauma lady? I don't want to go to the trauma lady. So after a lot of prodding, I went to the trauma lady, and I have to admit that he was right. And that's where eventually she diagnosed me. And I realized that I really do have all this stuff, and it was interfering with my OCD treatment. So it wasn't until I started to work on my trauma that I was actually able to progress in my ERP, which is interesting because I feel like it's different from both of you, where, you kind of uncovered something after OCD. I couldn't get through my ERP until after I really started working on my trauma. And for me, what's worked, honestly, is to treat them both concurrently, like side by side, parallel.
Yes, which is why this panel exists. Just exactly what you pointed out, Alex, because there's something to be said about what it means to be in treatment and really working at it, and for it still to not work, right? And I wanted to offer that to this space because there are a ton of people who are struggling and they just can't figure it out. Like, what am I doing wrong? Because we know how OCD works. OCD will shame you. It will tell you you're wrong. It will tell you you ain't doing something right. You will be the culprit by far. And so I wanted people to hear this, that your struggle is not your failure. Your struggle is something unseen. And we have a plug for the parents, and now we have a plug for the clinician, because the parents were right and the clinicians were right. So who are we plugging on your behalf, Maya? And by the way, Maya, there is a specific question about ADD, so I will let you share your experience. And then if you don't mind, can we present that to give them, if you can tag it, absolutely, you're not required, but I would like to see if we can address it. So yeah, what's your story, Maya?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. What Alex was saying kind of reminded me of some things that are not ADHD related, but there were some aspects of my OCD that were treated using ERP. Well, they were thought to be aspects of my OCD, but it actually turned out to be something that I'm still trying to figure out if it's like something like a learned pattern or something related to just like rigid thinking patterns or something. Excuse me, I just need to blow my nose. But yeah. So like there's some like aspects to my OCD. Like I'm trying to think. Like I used to have a certain fear, and it was like, oh, that must be OCD because OCD is so heterogeneous. Like it's probably just a type of OCD. And so I did ERP to help with that, and the ERP wasn't working, which is weird because I respond really well to ERP and pretty much like every other aspect of my OCD. And then eventually my therapist was like, maybe this isn't OCD, maybe this is just something you learned growing up, like a pattern you learned growing up, and we have to target it differently. And that's what it ended up being once we targeted it using something else. I think talk therapy, just like psychodynamic things, psychotherapy. It was able to be treated better than whenever I had tried to use ERP on it. So that was interesting. But in terms of the ADHD, I don't really remember it affecting my ERP, honestly, because I didn't even know I had it. The OCD, I feel like, kind of compensated for a lot of aspects of the ADHD. So in a way, it might have been like somewhat of a coping strategy, but like kind of a very, very maladaptive coping strategy. Like, for example, I recently learned that I have like slow processing because of ADHD. And I've been told, the woman who evaluated me, she told me, the psychologist who evaluated me, she said that might mean it'll take you a bit longer to read than some other people. And I was like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Because I used to have compulsions where I'd have to reread things. And I was like, at first I thought I had to reread things because it was OCD, and it was OCD, but it was also because I couldn't understand what I was reading. So it was like a little bit of both looking back. So things like that, my ADHD diagnosis started to explain. And in terms of the question in the chat.
Oh, you saw it? Wonderful.
Yes. If OCD's core is a dislike of uncertainty, then what is the core of ADHD? I can understand how the two overlap. Yeah, so my therapist, the way she explained it to me is that people with ADHD, your brain, like, it's not like OCD where it's like a fear of something or like or dislike. It's kind of like your brain is wired so that you have difficulty regulating your attention. It's not that you can't focus, it's that you have difficulty regulating your focus. So you're either are not focusing on something that is important, or you're hyper focusing on something. So pretty much it's not like you can't focus. Like sometimes you can focus even more than like a neurotypical person. But for example, someone might be focusing on their phone and they can't hear anything else going on around them because they're so hyper focused on their phone. So a dysregulation of like dysregulated attentional focus kind of thing. And also she told me that kind of you're constantly seeking reward with ADHD because you kind of exist at a slightly, I don't know how scientifically accurate this is, how I'm going to say this, but you exist at like a lower level of reward seeking, I guess. Like let's say like neurotypical people might be here, and then people with ADHD are here, so they have to like make up for it, the difference, by seeking reward. So fidgeting, like picking at your skin, being hyperactive, talking a lot, interrupting people, a lot of symptoms that you see with ADHD. They're like, you're trying to constantly stimulate yourself because you exist at a state of like lower stimulation, but then at the same time you can get easily overstimulated. People say it's a disorder of contradiction, so that's really what describes it.
That's super funny because as you were talking, that's what I heard too. I think one of the things too about ADHD is like the impulsivity. like this sense of like, oh, look at that new thing. Oh, look at the new thing, right? So you have this hyper focus, and then you have this difficulty in maintaining something, as you said, that's important to you or needs to get done. Yeah, great way to answer that. Thank you, Maya. So yeah, I'm curious, did that trigger anything or like prompt anything for you, Kyra or Alex, her sharing kind of that experience?
Oh, I was just about to say, no, but I completely understand how difficult it is, I guess, to gauge your different disorders. Like for mine, my BDD and my OCD, the two of the same things weren't helping each of them, if that makes sense. So I had to tackle them both independently, which was very, I felt at the time, very unfortunate. It's like, great, I have to do ERP for my OCD, and then I have to do something else for my BDD. Just like another thing added to my plate. Love that for me. And like, as you were saying before, OCD is such a shameful disorder, and I blamed myself for letting it get that bad and for thinking these things, and I thought that I was such a freak and all of these things. And I guess I really just wasn't educated enough on OCD at the time like I am now. And I wasn't really able to recognize the pattern. But something I learned through acceptance and commitment therapy was, I think I'm saying this right, holding your mind gently. Because as a perfectionist, I used to be, if I did an exposure one day and then I woke up the next day and I'm like, whoa, I have no clue how I did that. That is crazy. And then I'm like, well, why can't I do it today? Does that mean I'm regressing? Does that mean that I'm letting my OCD get worse? And something that Dr. Zarita told me was progress isn't necessarily linear. So you can go up and down and you don't have to feel bad about it. You don't have to feel like you're a failure, because if you were to look at where you are now from where you started, that's already such a big difference than just, it's a bigger difference than looking at where you were today and yesterday. You know what I mean? So it's better to sometimes take a step back, view the big picture, and not get so frustrated over small details that in the long run, you won't even remember this was an issue. So that's something that really helped me overcome my shame, and I don't know, had a lot of self-deprecating thoughts revolving my OCD. So if anybody out there is going through the same thing, I say if anybody, I'm sure we all on some level are going through that. So that's something that helped me. So hopefully it'll help one of you. But yes, there is hope for getting better. Because when I was, like I said, in the trenches of OCD, I never thought I'd make it out. And like being where I am today was something unimaginable. But I would just want to give, I don't know, everybody out there a little bit of hope and say, it's definitely difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but you can too. So.
Something you kind of mentioned, and I just thought of this, is just, I think we can get kind of caught up on the details of like, is this OCD? Is this something else? Is this my ADHD or my depression or my trauma? And I feel like OCD really loves that. Like, I know I've gone spinning off, just into ruminations on, well, is this symptom my OCD? Is it my trauma? Is it my depression? Or maybe I have something else. And sometimes I think we get all these different skill sets. Like I have all these different modalities that I utilize for stuff. And it's not so much of a, identifying what symptom is what, so much as, well, what skill is going to be useful for me here? And not worry so much about, which disorder is acting up. Just worry about managing whatever it is. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I think it's, kind of like what you were saying about not getting caught up on the details. It's the same thing. It's, we don't want to get so caught up in like our different labels that we're living our life by these labels and, trying to figure them out.
And I feel like that's another OCD thing, always having to be certain about everything and not being able to like live with the uncertainty of not knowing. So that's another part of my OCD that really like kicked into high gear.
Yeah, that's so true. I don't know, like I used to like count my diagnoses and I would be like, okay, these are the diagnoses that I have. And then I started studying psychology in college, and one of the first things that we talked about in the psychopathology class, which is like the class that studies mental illnesses, is that the DSM, which is like the big book of mental illnesses, is pretty much just made up by people. So it might not even be categorical. It might be more like of a giant spectrum than or multiple spectra than like even a categorical system. So like we put names and labels to these things, which can be helpful in so many ways, but it can also be harmful, especially if you have OCD and you obsess about it.
And you're speaking to the part clinically where this discussion is super important, because as you see, the way OCD works, and this is consistent, it will take something useful and turn it against you. It's literally what it does, right? So here we are in a clinical space, an OCD space, and we're talking about like, hey guys, be mindful of all these experiences that you might be having. It might help you explain why you're struggling. It might help you explain why you feel so shameful. It might help you explain why your ERP isn't working. It's giving you all this information. And then here your OCD comes in, it's like, ooh, but are you certain? Are you sure? And then here comes doubt, and then here comes uncertainty, and then it just scoops you up all into that spiral. And so I think for the sake of this space, I think everything you all are speaking to speaks to the fullness of this experience. And that with OCD treatment, you have to be careful to not get too anchored or sure or certain about anything. You just got to be willing to say, well, I don't know. And then, or leaning into it, how we do. It's like, hey, well, what if you do have that? Well, what if it is that, right? It's just like really pulling yourself through that, because this is the nature of OCD. And this is why we're talking about it, because it will literally take you this way and say, look at you being a failure for all the things you got to deal with. And then it will take you this way and say, ooh, you don't even know what's going on with you. Look at you being a failure, right? It's like, seriously? You can't get a break. So I think that is where this particular roundtable, this is why it's so important, because as much as we've talked about the confusing nature of it and the complexities of it, it's super important to create space for these dialogues, because the information becomes helpful. It's just, as we know with OCD, it hijacks all the things that are important to you. So here we are. And I would like to, I thought somebody had come up. Oh, Alex back. I would like to, because this was spoken of a little bit, where you all had shared about like what your buy-in was around EXRP or ERP in your treatment. Would you be able to share like what you found to be the most beneficial about it being an integrated treatment if you had it, or a separate treatment if you had it, and maybe add in there like what was surprising to you, like what did you find out or learn during the treatment that you didn't even think would work?
For me, like I said earlier, I was so resistant to ERP and everything regarding making my OCD better that I was so surprised when I actually started doing it right and doing it for myself. I was like, oh, this is how it's supposed to go. Same thing about, I guess, kind of talking and support groups. I used to hate them, and my mom used to force me to go on them, and I would just kind of like sit back with my phone and be like, yeah, I'm not really understanding. But now I feel, after going through my OCD journey, I'm so much more self-aware, and I think that these kind of experiences are so important to, I guess, everyone's healing. So that was something that definitely changed, was support groups and actually talking about it and being vulnerable, because I guess I never really knew how to do that before. So
Yeah, I can kind of relate to that. I kind of always was like into the whole ERP thing. Like as soon as my OCD onset, I was just like, I need this to go away. I need to do whatever it takes to like make it go away. So I did like lots of research online. I found out what ERP was, and then I like started doing ERP with a therapist, and it was only once a week, but my OCD was so severe that the limited amount of ERP I was doing just like wasn't enough. So when I went to residential treatment, I started seeing other kids my age with OCD, and they were at different stages of their treatment. Some were near discharge, some were in the middle, and I just kept seeing them do the work, and I heard them say like, oh my gosh, like I'm getting so much better. I'm doing things I never thought were possible. And I was like, okay, this stuff really works. So I'm going to do it. And that's when I really bought into it.
I'm trying to think of when I bought into ERP. I think for me, the first time I went through ERP, I mean, I liked it, which is, I know that sounds strange, right? Because a lot of people say they don't like it, but y'all, my doctor has the best sense of humor. And so he made it so fun that I actually kind of enjoyed it. That's so bad. But, I felt like I was getting a little bit better, but, I kept backsliding. And for me, I think, as trite as it is, having my son really changed a lot for me. I had been so used to my whole life, I think, kind of living in a state of misery and just depression and, my own trauma and self-sabotage. And so I didn't really know what it was like to really love and have something that I felt like was worth living for, like really living for. And so when I had my son, I just realized I really want to get better. I really want to get better. And what I'm doing is not working. And so very uncharacteristic of me, I threw caution to the wind and I was like, okay, I'm going to recommit to ERP. I'm going to do group therapy, which I have been turning down, just like you, Kyra. I did not want to do it. And I was like, I'm going to do group therapy and I'm going to see the trauma lady. So I was like, I'm going to do all the things and something is going to get better. And luckily, when I kind of did everything together, because group therapy for me was also a huge turning point. And it's something I'm very, very passionate about. But I think when I found community, when I really committed myself to ERP, when I started, kind of treating the other stuff and learning how to regulate my emotions and form better attachments with people, it all sort of came together. But I think with OCD, if you don't have that buy-in, like you said, Darlene, if you don't have that why, it's like you can't progress, I feel like.
And just out of curiosity, Alex, what was it about group therapy? I heard you mention community, and that's the first thing, obviously, I think about when I get into a group setting. But I imagine you didn't walk in there like, yes, I'm going to get a community. You were like, I'm just going to try whatever I can try. I'm just going to throw the whole kitchen sink at it because OCD, I am sick of you. Trauma, I am sick of you. So I'm just going to throw the sink at it. But what did you discover after going into the group therapy? And Kyra, you can speak to this too, because you talked a little bit about, being on your phone, probably looking like a regular old teenager. I can see you in there like, as a therapist, like,
no, that was totally.
Please put away your phone.
Yes, if you told Kyra, even I guess last year, that she would be leading a peer-led support group now, she would think that you are absolutely nuts. But now I've realized the benefit of it. So I created my own support group where it's just full of people talking about their experiences without shame. And that was unimaginable to me.
Amazing.
So definitely.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Maya? Oh, sorry, Alex.
Go ahead, Maya.
I was just saying that's awesome. I love that.
I think that for me, OCD by itself is such an isolating illness. And I think that, times are starting to change. And I'm seeing like younger and younger people get treatment and be okay about speaking about their experiences, which is amazing. That wasn't always the case. And so I carried a lot of stigma from how I grew up, from my culture, from, people saying things to me about mental illness and shaming me for going to therapy, and honestly from therapists themselves, sort of treating me like I couldn't be helped because they didn't understand what was going on with me. And so I think all of it just made me very silent about what I was going through. And even going through ERP, I was like, I'm the only one who feels this way. I'm the only one who has these awful thoughts. And I'm definitely the only one who's not getting better, So I just, so much shame and self-stigma and absolutely no self-compassion and lots of black and white thinking and lots of, honestly, like just cognitive distortions and negative self-talk. And when I got to group, people started pointing it out and holding me accountable. And it wasn't, I couldn't laugh it off because it was my therapist, because that's what I did to him. I'm the worst. I couldn't just laugh it off because all these other people were noticing it and pointing it out. And it was a different experience. And once I got used to that, I realized it's what I needed. And honestly, it was so freeing just to have people understand me.
One of the things that I've noticed as the provider sitting in the therapist seat is telling on OCD is by far like the most effective strategy for treatment. And it is also the hardest thing you can ever do when you walk in the door. And so what I hear is that from that group experience, you got some accountability, but it gave OCD nowhere to hide. And that's what I want people to take as on top of all this other stuff. That's what I want you to take away. Remove the places that OCD can hide. The places that OCD will try to hide is behind all these experiences and examples that you've heard on this platform. The ones we haven't talked about, because what I know as a provider is that anxiety disorders are like real cool. They will come in there together. So you'll have some generalized anxiety disorder. You'll have the agoraphobia. You'll have the OCD. And then we get into the mood dynamics. You'll have the depression. You'll have the suicidal thoughts. You'll have that. And somewhere in this whole space is where we talk about how to get support if you're feeling unsafe, if you're having those thoughts, if you find that to be shameful, if you're navigating the dual layered stigma of OCD and other things. This is why this conversation and this dialogue is so important, because what these folks on this panel have expressed is that yes, it's complicated. Yes, it's confusing. You never know which came first. Sometimes they show up together, right? Like this is literally what I've heard tonight. There is no way into this, but there are very clear ways out of this. OCD never goes away. It's not a death wish though. It's a context. It's a context. I want you to hear that while it doesn't go away, you learn to manage it. You learn to like, hey, if it's coming in here in the form of intrusive thoughts, let them come on through. You don't got to stop them. Let it walk on past. That's how I always tell people. One thing that OCD is like your mind puts up these blockers. You're like, no, I got to catch it. And I got to get it out of here. And we got to move it out. It's like, no. Simmer down. Put those hands down. Let it walk on past. See what you get. After a while, like, oh, so you ain't going to say nothing? You're not going to respond to me? Nope. I'm sorry. I got to go over here and do this. Removing the power. And if it brings along a friend in whatever form that it shows up, you might have to hold the friend out until you can get some understanding of how the friend comes in, or they might come in together and you're like shocked, like, oh my God, what is this trauma? What is this OCD? I don't know what to do with it. Or in my instance, it's just like, what? I didn't even know you were a thing. You're a problem? You just came in here and just start messing stuff up, right? Like, this is the nature of treatment. And it's possible. It's possible to regain your life, to regain your functioning. It is possible to exist. There are skills out there. There's support out there. You are not alone. And yes, the stigma and the shame is there, but it's not meant for you to be stuck there. And I hope that's what you walked away from tonight. Closing remarks. Each of you like to leave something with the audience that you feel is valuable, that you feel is important, that you feel is relevant. What would you say?
I would say that if you're far enough along in your OCD journey where you can reasonably distinguish between what is OCD and what is not, and like fight those thoughts that make you think everything is OCD or make you think everything is not OCD. And you think there's something else going on that is not OCD, and people keep telling you, no, it's just OCD. It's very hard to navigate because, like we were talking about, OCD will mess with your mind. But just you can keep pushing for like a proper evaluation. There's nothing wrong with that. The worst thing they could say is you don't have this, or that they could say you do have this, and then you can get treatment for it. So just listen to yourself. Don't listen to OCD. Listen to yourself when it comes to these things.
I guess something that I want everybody to know is that you are completely not alone. I know that people on this panel have said such amazing things, and I hope that that's made you feel a bit more, I don't know, included and given you a bit of peace of mind, because I remember the first group session I actually participated in, this girl was talking about something, and I'm like, you're kidding me. I do the same thing, and I felt so understood in that moment, and that just meant everything to me, and it was just another thing to help keep the ball rolling. And don't beat yourself up if the ball goes a little bit slower, or if the ball stops for a second. You can do it, and I have the utmost faith in all of you lovely people out there. So, yes.
Okay, y'all, I hope you can hear me because my husband is downstairs and he just started banging on the drums. So I apologize.
Oh no, we've been getting a whole concert. I don't know if you know that, Alex, but yeah, we've been getting a concert. We just enjoyed
I'm so
it. At least
sorry.
You're fine, Alex. Go ahead.
That's like his stress relief after work.
Absolutely understood. No judgment. We were rolling with
I was
it.
about to start dancing.
Were you really? Were you about
At a
to start
point,
rocking
yeah, it was
out?
good.
Oh my goodness.
Because I mean, it was a nice little rhythm. It was like boom, boom. But as you were, Alex, as you were.
So rad. So I think, with OCD and trauma, I get so many questions about this. And I think, to me, the most valuable, most important thing is to know that, not everything has to be delved into and,
Yes.
brought back up and, discussed and dissected just for the sake of healing your OCD. I'm going to say this, and it's going to be a spicy take. Healing my trauma has not cured my OCD. And it's not going to. And whether, whether I went to, ERP and then decided to go to trauma therapy or not, I'd still have OCD. And I think that, anybody who pressures you or tries to pressure you to talk about things that you're not ready to talk about or you don't want to talk about is not the therapist for you. I feel very strongly about that. And I think that it's so important for us to protect ourselves and protect our boundaries and to take care of ourselves and offer ourselves lots of compassion. And just make sure that the information we're taking in is evidence-based and scholarly, and that the people that we're putting, our trust in to help us have our best interest at heart, because trauma and OCD is such a difficult topic, and there's so much room for healing, but there's also room for harm.
Absolutely.
And it can get better.
It does get better. It does. So again, thank you, Alex, Maya, Kyra. I thank you for your time. I would like to close by saying self-compassion is a huge piece of this, but everything about this roundtable is about action. It's about advocacy. It's about lifting your voice. And that will come in the form of setting boundaries within your healing process. There's information out there. There are opportunities and resources out there. But your healing journey, your ERP treatment, your therapy, feel empowered. It is yours. It belongs to you because you know you best. As a whole OCD therapist, I feel like I can say I'm pretty good at what I do. And in that same breath, you are the expert on you. So it should feel like a collaboration. because ultimately you're aligning to combat your OCD. You're aligning to find skills and resources to navigate the other overlapping experiences that decide to, just try to find a room in your house. I love to use analogies because people get it, right? But ultimately, you're the landlord. You own the home. So that's for providers you decide to let in. That's for community, family. That's for even your self-critical, self-judgmental self, right? Like there are some other people in our head that try to take over what's going on, right? So keep that part in mind. And with that, I want to thank everyone for showing up. We are out of time. I will ask that you join us again in a couple of months as we will be putting out information about the future roundtables. We will not see you all for the holidays. So for those of you who are navigating the next couple of months and leaving space for your cultural and ethnic celebrations and honoring of certain catastrophes that have existed in our Americas, I want to note that and really offer thank yous to all of you for showing up and joining us in the space. And I hope you got something from it. Feel free to use the resources and the contact information provided here. Reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. If there's a topic, a suggestion, or recommendations, tell us your thoughts because this space has been created for you. And so again, our action is advocacy, and that comes in many forms. So we welcome that information. We welcome that feedback. So with that, I would like to say good night. Thank you for coming again, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you, panelists. I appreciate your support. Bye, everyone.